So just getting into it, LA Alfresco launched on May 29th. Mayor Eric Garcetti launched LA Alfresco to give restaurants and bars additional space in the public right-of-way to be able to provide table service that was safe from a public health perspective. So because of at the time, the county public health guidelines that restricted the number of tables and how close tables had to be together, we sort of hunted for every nook and cranny of available space that we could provide to businesses so that they could open with enough table service to be able to survive. So this is really intended to help you stand up operations as quickly as possible. This is a temporary permit. So it will only be around until, at this point, September 1st. We hope to work with the mayor's office to extend that through the lifespan of as long as the coronavirus and existing public health guidelines are in place. And this permit overrides the existing outdoor dining permits that you might have been used to filling out. So that includes the Bureau of Engineering's existing sidewalk dining permit, or going through the Department of Building and Safety to use your existing private parking lots for dining, as well as the special events permit that you might have done for a day-long outdoor dining festival. The program is free and expedited, and I'll talk about how quick it is to get a permit. We've really prioritized making this as seamless and streamlined as possible. And then last but not least, there are, again, we looked under every nook and cranny, every rock to figure out how to create as much available space that the city had purview over to give you the opportunity to open your business in those spaces. And that really means that we've got 4 essential types of closures. And I'll talk about what those look like. For your reference, and to give you a sense of scale for this program, about 1,500 applications have been submitted since launching on May 29th, which has meant that we've been able to permit almost 1,300 of those applications in the last, 2 months. So, so you can see that the vast majority of applications submitted are approved, and that the scale of this program is really citywide. I'll talk a little bit about what this word curbside dining means, but if you've seen basically bike rack fencing and some planter boxes and umbrellas in the middle of the street, that's likely what we are calling our curbside dining permit. And we have 33 of those throughout the city. We've been able to construct 33 of those in about a month. So, to give businesses who don't have enough sidewalk space, additional space in the right of way. And on average, it takes about 18 minutes to apply, which we hope is impressive to you. I've worked in the city for some time, and it's certainly the fastest application I've really experienced. Okay, so I mentioned that there are 4 kind of essential types of alfresco applications. So I hope everyone can see this. If my face or Rosemary's face or Jen's face is blocking your ability to see this graphic, you can actually move us around to the top of your screen or the bottom of your screen. So I'll start from the left. The first type of alfresco permit that we're providing is use of the sidewalk. So many of the businesses on this call may be familiar with the Bureau of Engineering's sidewalk dining program. In normal times, that program has a fee associated and takes between 6 and 18 months to submit and be approved. Because we're not in normal times at all, we've included the ability to put tables and chairs out in the sidewalk as part of alfresco. And again, once you apply for this particular piece of the program for a sidewalk dining permit, it takes about 18 minutes for you to tell the city that you meet all of our certifications and requirements, and then at the end of that application process, you should get a certificate to operate on the sidewalk. Rosemary will walk you through what that application looks like. But again, major requirements are around insurance and making sure that people walking can still pass safely by your table and chair setup. The second type of application that we have for alfresco is expanded outdoor private property dining. So this is really geared toward businesses that have existing parking lots adjacent to or behind their business, or even in front of their business. So again, you might be used to going through the Department of Building and Safety for this application. In this case, you'll go through alfresco now, and again, it's free. Once you apply, you certify that you meet our requirements, you should be given a certificate to operate in your private dining spaces. And again, the average time to apply is about 18 minutes. And so long, and this is true for sidewalk dining, so long as you meet the county public health guidelines for table and chair setup, you should be good to go. The second and third types of applications through alfresco that we offer are a little bit more complicated and are not types of applications where you get immediate approval to operate. And that is really because these two types of applications allow you to operate in the middle of the street. And obviously, because of vehicular traffic or bus traffic and all of the sort of activity that happens on that asphalt, it takes LADOT just a little bit of time to make sure that we can design that space safely. So just to make that real for everyone, we have the ability to close down 2 parking spaces adjacent to the curb. We call that curbside dining. Some of you may have heard of LADOT's People Street program, where we have these little parklets that are next to the sidewalk and have tables and chairs set up. This is a version of that. If you're familiar with those programs. And then again, I mentioned that we have 33 of these curbside dining permits across the city already installed. And I can give you a little visual example of what that looks like if it's not making sense to you quite yet. And then last but certainly not least is taking up more than 2 parking spaces in the middle of the street, taking up a lane, 2 lanes, 3 lanes, or most of the street, and preserving space for evacuation and a fire lane. So I'll give you visual examples of what that looks like as well. Again, the application itself takes about 18 minutes to fill out, but because LADOT has to review the conditions of the street and create a safe design for businesses to actually start putting people, human beings, in the middle of those streets with competing other things happening, we have not been able to do that process overnight, and can take a couple of weeks, and I'll go through the timeline later on. Okay, so just to give you a bird's eye view of what this looks like, starting from left to right, we have curbside dining, so that's taking up 2 parking spaces, usually directly in front of your business, to be able to deploy tables and chairs. A version of our kind of fuller street closures include taking up the whole parking lane. I will note, and Rosemary will talk about this in the as she demonstrates the application, curbside dining is really appropriate for one business, right? Because, you know, the number of tables and chairs you can fit in that space is appropriate for the size of one business, and it doesn't hugely impact the other businesses in the area, especially as people are just traveling and occupying parking spaces a little bit less during this pandemic. For a parking lane, we really recommend a group of businesses or a business improvement district or a chamber of commerce to take up the full length of a parking lane, just because the impacts are greater for other businesses. And so we want to make sure that that everyone is bought into closing down that lane or even a parking lane and a travel lane. We've presented to the Consortium of Business Improvement Districts and are getting the word out through chambers of commerce. And so if you are an individual business as part of a larger association, I absolutely encourage you to reach out to make sure that, you know, an application on their end isn't already in the works. And then again, we've got an opportunity to do a full street closure, so taking up the vast majority of the street from curb to curb while maintaining a fire lane for any emergency purposes. So that is the sort of breadth of what we offer through LAL Fresco. To give you a visual example of, I think, the one that I find the hardest to conceive of without seeing it, this is what a curbside dining permit looks like. I'll talk about where these materials come from in just a moment, but you can see we basically mark out 2 parking spaces with fencing, bollards, and then these amazing 700-pound planter boxes so that people are safe in that space, and then the business would deploy tables, chairs, and umbrellas. Okay, really quickly to touch on roles and responsibilities. The applicant, the permit holder, is responsible for maintaining on a day-to-day basis the space that they're using for outdoor dining. The applicant is also responsible for the tables and chairs that they use in that space. The city is responsible for traffic control equipment. And if you are not familiar with what traffic control equipment means, I'll just go back to the previous slide. We would consider this perimeter, which is actually a bike rack, but what we use for just marking out a space. So that is one traffic control device. These bollards, these like plastic poles, I guess, with reflective tape are also traffic control devices. And then these planter boxes are 700 pounds. So theoretically, if you bump into them, your car isn't really moving them, but they're nicer looking. So all of those elements are what we consider traffic control devices, and that's what the city would deploy if you are applying for a curbside dining permit. The applicant is also responsible for personal protective and social distancing equipment. So you are responsible for ensuring that you're meeting the guidelines set forth by the County Department of Public Health. You also do have to confirm that you have liability insurance, a policy of covering about $300,000 or more. And then depending on the type of application, you are also responsible for notifying other businesses along the corridor that you plan to, in this case, close down a street. Very quickly again, before we get to the actual application demonstration, as I mentioned, when you apply to use the sidewalk or existing private property that you have to set up tables and chairs, the application takes 18 minutes. And then if you meet the self-certification requirements, you should be given a certificate immediately. So the timeline for getting permitted is 18 minutes. Because, as I mentioned, it's a little bit more complicated to carve out space where there's a bunch of other activity in the street, it's taken us about 3 weeks on average from the time you apply for curbside dining to the time that you actually have the space carved out to be able to start serving people in the curbside dining area. So about 3 weeks. And then this, if you've heard me talk or present at a meeting of yours, for full street closures, we are waiting on additional traffic control equipment to be able to implement full street closure permits. And so we have not yet been able to implement any full street closure. If you've applied and are still waiting, we do apologize for that delay. We're working as hard as we possibly can to expedite that. We know the summer is key And so we want to make sure that you're able to do that, but have some constraints on our end. And so know that we're working hard. And then again, I mentioned that your permits, the certificates to operate will say that the permit expires on September 1st. We are working to try and extend that in some form or fashion with the mayor's office. Okay, and with that, I will hand it over to Rosemary to walk us through the application itself.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Great. So this is our Fresco homepage that if you go to coronavirus LA/Fresco, the link that we put into the chat, that will take you here. It provides you some details about the program. And we also supply a manual to help you get through the application in English and Spanish, so you can access that here. And we also have some guidelines, protocols, and frequently asked questions. But to apply for the program, you'll click this Apply Now button. And that will take you directly to our application in both English and Spanish. And so as Lily said, we have the 4 different options, and they're split into 2 different applications. So there's the application that offers immediate approval, and that's for the sidewalk and outdoor private property dining. And then there's our on-street application that requires further review from LADOT. So I'll walk you through the sidewalk and expanded outdoor private property dining application first, and then we'll walk through the other one as well. So you can choose which application you want to apply for when you're here, and when you click on it, you'll be able to get started. If you started an application and you can't find it, if you go back to this link, you can do that here. So this is just our home page for the application, and once I click Start, it will let me know that I've already started some applications. So if you've started an application already, you'll be able to find that here. But I'm just going to start another one to walk you through. So as the application launches, you're taken to a home page, which again provides some more detail regarding all of the options. I do recommend reading through it and making sure that you're applying for the option that works best for your business. You are able to apply for all options, and you're welcome to, so you can complete this application and then go to the next one. You can also see here, we describe sidewalk dining and private property dining here. If you decide you don't want to do those and you are more interested in curbside dining, we have a link that will take you directly to that application. I also want to highlight there's this discussion function up at the top right. So if you're having difficulty filling out the application at any point, or you just need to ask a question, you can submit it through that discussion function. It's not monitored 24 hours a day, but we will get back to you typically within 24 hours. So now I'm going to go to the next step. And I'll show what it's like to apply for both options. So the first set of questions are just making sure that your business is in the city of Los Angeles. We've had a lot of people apply. There are a lot of other outdoor dining programs going on, and some people just aren't sure. So we just want to make sure that your business is in the city of Los Angeles and that you're licensed to operate here. So I will answer yes to both of these questions. If I don't answer yes to both of these questions, that will cause my application to be flagged, and it will postpone my approval. So you do just want to make sure that the answer is yes for both of these questions if you're applying, and make sure that you select yes. So again, we define sidewalk dining as using the sidewalk immediately in front of your business to provide tables and chairs for dining. So I would like to apply for sidewalk dining. And then we have expanded outdoor private property dining. So as Lily said, it includes a private parking lot or other private outdoor space. So I do want to highlight, if you are in a shopping plaza, or you want the dining area in your private parking lot, this is what you want to apply for. Additionally, if you're in a shopping plaza and there's a pedestrian walkway, We don't consider that the sidewalk. You don't have to fill out a sidewalk application. The sidewalk is more for the public right-of-way. So if you're on private property, you want to select this private property option. So I'm going to say I'm interested in that as well. And for some businesses, you may want to apply for both. So once you select yes, you get some more details about the program. The sidewalk dining details are here. They're also available on the Bureau of Engineering website. And this lays out everything you need to do to participate in the program. And all of the terms and conditions. So the only information we really need on this step to apply for sidewalk dining is a description. So we could say we're going to put in 4 tables and 8 chairs. We just want to have an idea of what you're doing. If you have a sketch of the area outside your restaurant and you're able to upload it, that's great. We'd love to see it, but we don't want that to hold you up. So it's an optional feature. So that's all we need for sidewalk dining. When we keep going down, we start seeing the private property details. So again, this tells you about the terms and conditions of the program. And then we ask you to complete the information below to apply. So I might want to use the parking area in front of my building and then the private property walkways in front of my building. This other is optional depending on if there's some other private property area you want to use that doesn't fit any of these descriptors above. And then we ask about how many seats you're planning on putting out there. So let's say I'm going to put 20 seats and I'm going to have 5 tables. And maybe I'm going to have 300 square feet of outdoor dining area. This is approximate. We're not going to go out and measure this. We just want to have an idea of the scale of your operation. Then we ask if you are the property owner or the tenant. We ask this because if you're using private property, we want to make sure that the owner of the property is aware that you're applying. So we let you know that you must obtain permission from the property owner to apply, and we ask you to certify that you have done that. Then we just ask some general information about the operation. And these questions apply whether you are looking for sidewalk dining, private property dining, or both. So we ask you what hours you'll be operating, or what days, excuse me. So you can choose weekdays, weekends, or both. I'll choose both. And then you can select what times of day. So maybe you're only doing dinner service. So you might only be operating in the evening. Then we also ask if you're going to serve alcohol in the temporary outdoor dining area. If you do want to serve alcohol in the temporary outdoor dining area, you have to follow the regulations that currently govern service indoors, which is, getting licensed by the ABC, the Alcoholic Beverage Control, and our Department of City Planning. In addition, ABC is requiring a temporary catering permit, and that you can apply for using this link. So we provide that information here. So if I say yes, it will ask me to certify that the Department of City Planning has approved alcohol service for my business. I'll say yes. The next step is just asking for some information about you and your business. So my restaurant will just be called Rose's Restaurant. And it will be located at 100 South Main Street. So the address suggests here. So if you click on the address there, it will do a validation and ask you if you want to use that address. So I'll use the suggested address. Then it pops up on a map here so that you can verify that that's the address you really meant. I'll put in my name. And you can see on the application, these fields that have red stars, if those fields are not completed, you won't be able to go on to the next step. So if you're having trouble and you want to go to the next step and you see that things are grayed out, the issue is probably that you missed a question. So just go back and go through the form and make sure that you've selected everything. So we ask you to certify that, that the person who's applying has been authorized by the business owner to apply for this. We don't want someone who works for the restaurant just to apply and the owner doesn't want to pursue that option. So we just ask you to verify that you are authorized to apply. And then we ask an optional question about whether the business owner or majority ownership identifies as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color. So in my case, I'll select no. This option is available to restaurants or street vendors. So we just want to know which type of business you are. So I will be an individual business. And then we want to know, is the business publicly traded? Mine is not. This is an optional question, so I'll skip it. We just wanted to identify if the business was in a no vending zone. And then we have other information. So if there's anything you think would help us understand what you're trying to do, or you want to, you know, just clarify that you're going to use this certain space or anything like that, you have the room to provide that information. This is optional, so I won't put anything here. I'm just going to go to the next step. And the next step is our certifications, where you agree to all of the terms and conditions of the program. This is another step that can get your application flagged. So if you don't answer yes to all of the questions here, or check off and acknowledge all of the boxes here, that will flag your application for review. So please, when you're filling this out, just make sure that you have answered everything. If you try to click through too fast, sometimes it doesn't update. So, you know, take your time with this step. So we ask you to certify that you have $300,000 in liability insurance. For sidewalk dining, you need to certify that you will keep a 5-foot wide pedestrian path. There's a question that you're acknowledging that alcoholic beverages can only be served with the appropriate approvals. Your business may not serve alcohol, but you're just acknowledging at the step that you understand that you need those approvals to serve alcohol. So even if you don't serve alcohol, you do want to mark yes to this question. That's something that sometimes gets people flagged. And again, I'm just going to click through the rest of these and mark yes. And you can see all of these yourself in the application. And I'm going to check all the boxes. I'll also acknowledge that this is the final step of the application. So once you fill this out, you can't go back and make changes. It will lock the application. So we can unlock it for you. If you do need to make changes, you can just let us know through the discussion. But just so you know, before you click go to the next step. And we do let you know that here at the top as well. Okay, so I've checked all my boxes. I'm going to go to the next step. Tells me the information cannot be modified, and that's okay. I'm just going to do, and you just sign using your mouse on the computer. So I'm going to sign this application, certify that everything's correct. And it is slowly getting there, but we're here. So now my authorization is available for download. We give you the link to go back if you want to do on-street dining, and we also give you that link again to apply for permission from the ABC to serve alcohol in the outdoor area. And from here, you can just download your document, and hopefully you can see this window. So it prints out a PDF that will just immediately have this authorization that indicates that I applied for sidewalks and private property, has my information, my signature, and I can just print this out and display this in the outdoor dining area. So now I'm gonna go, if I click this top logo, it'll actually take me back to that application place we started at, where you can select all of the applications. So I'll just show you an on-street dining application that I already completed. It's very similar. There's just some slight different details that we'll ask of you. So I'm going to go to this one that I already launched and just walk you all through it. So if I had started this application fresh, I would have landed at this Welcome to LA Al Fresco page, which again is just sort of a mirror of the other application. It tells you about all of the different options and helps you select the option that's right for you. Once you go to the next step, you are asked the same questions. Is your business in the city of LA? Do you have a business tax registration certificate? Are you in a no vending zone? And then we ask if you're interested in curbside dining, which uses 2 on-street parking spaces to create an area where you can set up tables and chairs. So if you apply yes, you get the questions for curbside dining. And then we also ask about dining in the street. So that allows groups of restaurants or groups of street vendors to create areas on the street for their use. You can use an on-street parking lane, a vehicle traveling, or the whole street. So if you mark yes to this, you'll get the applications for dining in the street. So here we have some of the parameters of the curbside dining. They're typically installed on streets with a speed limit of 25 miles per hour or less. We do have a little bit of flexibility. If there's a bike lane separating the parking from the vehicle traffic, we can go up to 30 miles per hour. So, you know, you're welcome to submit an application if it's above 25 miles per hour, but just know that, you know, we may not be able to accommodate that request. If you're located on a corner and one street has a higher speed limit, but the street around the corner has a lower speed limit, we might be able to put it on the side of your restaurant if that would work for you. We also ask that the streets have 2 lanes or less in each direction. We can't install a curbside dining area if it's within 15 feet of a fire hydrant. And you also need to have at least 2 on-street parking spaces adjacent to the business to be able to accommodate it. So again, you enter the address much like you did in the other application. I'm going to use that suggested address. We ask if your business has requested a food pickup parking zone. That's just to help us understand if you already have that and if we need to take that into account and, you know, consult with you about whether you would, you know, if you have to choose one or the other, which one you would prefer. And then we ask about a farmer's market. So if there's a regular event like a farmer's market that typically uses the street space that you would like to use, you know, we'd like to know that. It's typically up to the applicant to work out an agreement with the farmer's market about whether they can use that space and how they can accommodate it. Once the city comes and installs the curbside dining area, the materials can't be moved. So some farmers markets can work around that and some can't. So it's up to the applicant to negotiate that. And that's all the information we ask for the curbside dining area. Then dining in the street, we have similar guidance. We do ask for streets to have a speed limit of 25 miles per hour or lower. You know, if your street doesn't meet that criteria, you can still apply. We're doing what we can to be flexible to accommodate things. And, you know, as we implement these, we're going to learn more and see what we can do. We can't close a street that's within 2 blocks of a fire station, police station, and or hospital, just to make sure that emergency services are able to operate. And individual businesses aren't eligible to apply for a street closure. And that's for some of the reasons Lily stated earlier. We want to make sure that there's organized support for this. And we also want to make sure we're deploying these resources efficiently to help the most businesses that we can. So we ask that there's an organizing entity, like a group of businesses applying as a unified entity, a business improvement district, a chamber of commerce, or some other community organization. However, if you are an individual business and you're interested, you can still fill this out and it will let us know where interest for a street closure is. But you know, your application will likely not be approved unless we can find some greater organization to help you apply. So in terms of the lane closures, we ask you what type of area you would prefer, whether you want just a closure of a lane or if you want the whole street to be closed to vehicles. We ask you what street you're requesting the closure on and from what street to what street. So in this case, I put from First Street to Main Street. And then we ask you for an address, again, just to help us pinpoint the location and make sure we're looking at the same place as you. You are also, in this case, required to upload a photo or a map of the closure area. And this can be hand-drawn, sketched, a little drawing on a Google map. I uploaded a sample here just so you could see someone just drew a line on a Google map. And that's fine. We just kind of want to have an idea of what you're looking for. We also ask you to list all of the businesses that will operate in that on-street dining area. If you choose a lane closure, we want to know what side of the street you're requesting to close. So we ask you for that information. And then these other fields will look familiar from the last application. So we just ask for some information about the business operation. When will it be operating? What days of the week? What times of the day? And then we ask the same questions about alcohol service. The step 3 again is very similar to what we saw before. We just ask for the contact information. We ask that you're authorized to apply. We ask for what type of an applicant you are. In this case, we have more options. You might be a group of businesses, a business improvement district, something like that. And then again, we have this other information. So you can give us any more details that will help us understand what you want to happen on the street so that we can, try to accommodate your request as best as we can. So we can see, since I already filled this out, it's locked. So if I wanted to request that it be unlocked, I could start a new discussion here and say, please unlock my application. And that will send us an email that will alert us that your application needs some attention, and we will do our best to get back to you as soon as we can. And then again, you need to make sure that you've answered yes to all of the questions, and then you sign. If there's anything that you filled out that wasn't quite correct, we will, your application may be flagged for additional review, which is the step 5, where we'll try to clarify any information we need to. But then you land on this feasibility review step. So no review is required at this time. I'm going to go to the next step, and that's feasibility review. And that means that your application is complete from your perspective at this point, and it's landed back on LADOT's lap. And so it's our turn to do our review and get back to you as soon as we can. And with that, I'll throw it back to Lily.
Awesome. Okay, I'll bring back up my my presentation. Give me 1 second. Okay, so again, the application itself can be found at the city's coronavirus website, corona-virus.la/LALfresco, which takes you to a home screen where you can apply in English and in Spanish for any of the application processes that we talked about today. Okay, so a couple additional resources before we dive into Q&A. Our FAQs, frequently asked questions, can also be found on the same webpage where you can find the application. So again, that is corona-virus.la/LAalfresco. Currently, we also have an application manual in English and Spanish hosted in the same places, and are working on versions of the application manual translated in a couple of additional languages, including Korean and Chinese, and hope to have those up as soon as possible. I know there are a number of businesses that have been asking for those, and so we are working on it urgently. In the meantime, the English and Spanish version can be found online, which essentially does the written version of what Rosemary just did. So trying to give you as much information in as many formats as possible for your application. And then, as always, you can ask, as Rosemary demonstrated, you can ask questions in the City Grows portal itself about your specific application, or you can reach out to us at elfresco@lacity.org. Rosemary checks those emails as well. So 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. They'll encourage you to use the City Grows portal about specific applications, questions about specific applications. And want to just flag a couple of additional resources that LADOT and the city offer for business assistance. So we have a number of programs that LADOT has launched, including, and I'll talk about the pickup and delivery loading zone for retail and restaurants. You know, 10-minute use of commercial loading zones to be able to run in and run out for curbside dining on the street, along with about a dozen other programs to support businesses and communities during this challenging time. There are a number of other resources that the broader city family have also stood up, including the LA Care Corps program, to help with the economic injury disaster loan and paycheck protection program. More information can be found at the link below. So want to make sure folks are aware of those programs, as they're separate and aside from LA Fresco, but are intended to help support. And then just a final reminder about how to ask questions during this webinar. The Q&A box, many of you have already been asking and using, so thank you. And then outside or after this webinar ends, you can reach out to elfresco@lacity.org. We're going to try and stay away from answering questions about specific applications. Again, encourage you to ask those questions through the City Grows portal, and if you absolutely have to, through elfresco@lacity.org. Okay, so I'll leave those instructions up just in case anyone needs them. And with that, we'll take some questions. So thank you to Jen, who has helped to answer some questions already. If you've missed it, you can go to the answer tab in the Q&A to get a sense of what we've already addressed, including who's investigating the existing permits and whether they're violating any rules, whether nail salons and nail spas are eligible, et cetera, et cetera. So encourage folks to read through that. If we have time, we'll go back and make sure everyone is aware of the questions that have already been answered. But without further ado, the first question comes from Jose, who's asking how we request planters or barriers. So, Rose, you know, feel free to tag team this with me, but we are providing planters and barriers for businesses that apply for the curbside dining permit. So if you'd like to use planters and barriers, you would apply for a curbside dining permit. I think, Jose, I saw in the chat as well that you were asking if we were providing those for sidewalk dining and private property use as well, and unfortunately we aren't. Those planters and barriers are really intended for traffic control, and you know, because the traffic control in a parking lot is not quite the same as an operating street. We're not able to provide that at this time. Hope that answers it. And if I get to your question and you have additional thoughts or comments, you can just chat them. Rose, anything else I missed on that?
No, I think you answered that quite well.
Great. Okay. Next question comes from Brandy. Will the neighborhood councils weigh in on, I think, this 3/4 type dining refers to street closure dining, I would assume. At this point, just for speed and expediency, and really because this is an emergency program intended for emergency business assistance, we've not added in any requirements that businesses or applicants for any of the various permits go through neighborhood councils. So, you know, in short, Brandy, no, but feel free to add more context in the chat and we can get to it. Oops, am I back? I think I got kicked off for a second. Now my heart stopped. This one is a little bit more tricky. Do you want to take this?
Sorry.
I'm looking at the multi-tenant retail property question from Avison.
I would say ideally we would like each entity to complete an application so that we know exactly what to expect at what location. And I will just highlight too that, you know, it's available to restaurants only at this point. So it would only apply to the restaurants that are there. Yeah, I think with the private property application, you would want to file a separate one for each one unless, you know, they have different suite numbers and you can just put in the one address.
Cool. Okay. For type 3 private property option, do you ask for landlord approval?
Yes, in the application, we do ask whether they're a tenant or an owner, and we do ask if it is a tenant, we ask them to self-certify that they do have permission from the property owner.
Next question comes from David Jacobson. How many curbside dining and in-street permits have been issued and how many implemented? So I mentioned earlier on that 33 have been implemented. And Rose, unless you've got the number off the top of your head, I'm looking to see how many have applied right now. Do you have that number?
We've had about 200 applications. About half of those applications are just not feasible. As I mentioned with the private property, there's a lot of people who applied who have parking spaces in front of them in a shopping plaza that are on private property that applied for curbside dining. And the city can't supply curbside dining in those areas. It's meant for on the street. So there's applications like that that just are not valid locations for the on-street dining. And then speed limit is another major factor. You know, if the speed limit is 35 or 40 miles an hour, we haven't been able to implement. But yeah, we have 33 implemented. We have probably about 10 more in progress, and we're getting more applications every day.
Great. This next question comes from Tatiana Austin, and I'm going to say right off the bat, I haven't heard of this yet, but I received a call from HQ asking if Alfresco participants are allowed to charge a cover for entry.
That is not allowed per the mayor's orders. You cannot have private events or charge cover. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Does the food pickup parking zone require a separate permit? Yes. And I mentioned it toward the end of the presentation where you can find that application and the turnaround from applying to actually getting a sign posted was 3 days, a 3-day period last I checked. And so it should be fairly quick. Marion asks, if you do with a group of businesses, does each business have to provide 300,000 limit insurance certificate?
Yes, I should highlight that for the on-street dining, we actually require a $500,000 limit. And that's due to the increased risk of being on the street versus being on a sidewalk or on private property. If you are applying as a group of businesses, we do require that each business have that amount. Although, you know, if it's a street closure and there's sufficient liability in the area, we may be able to have some flexibility if there's one participating business that doesn't have that. I would say just, you know, put that in your application, put it in the discussion, let us know, and we'll do our best to work with you.
Great. Okay. T.R. Gregory, is there any discussion about making the curbside option permanent? I'll take this. You know, so we actually have a program that this Alfresco program is modeled off of. It's called People Street. You can find more information about People Street at livablestreetsladot.org. And actually, you know, among the many hats that Rosemary wears, People Street is also in her portfolio. So we've stretched her as thin as we possibly can. And so that program is for normal time, where we actually construct an ADA compliant platform. It's for public use, so it's not just for private table service and dining, but anyone can use it in sort of an extension of the sidewalk itself, but with more seating. So in some ways, this is like the expedited and explicitly business support version of the program. It's certainly on our minds because, you know, from my opinion, the curbside dining in the areas where we've been able to do it just really add a level of quality of life and livability that change the look and feel of the street immediately, sort of like a bright spot in this pandemic, but we haven't yet figured out an actual explicit policy and would want to coordinate that with the mayor's office and our other department partners. Hope that answers it. Happy to answer any other questions on it or chat me. Okay, next question from Michael Burbank. Are we able to find a list of applications for full street dining? Rosemary, you want to take this? You're muted.
I can share my screen. We don't have a public list of everyone who's applied. That's the short answer. You can see the number of applications. If I share here, when you are at the Alfresco page, you can view the stats. And we can see how many people have applied. So would you like to apply for curbside dining? We had 242 people say yes, they wanted to apply for curbside dining. These aren't all necessarily completed applications, but this is as far as people went, they answered this. So we have 164 applicants who have applied for dining on the street. The vast majority of these are individual businesses, and so they're not really eligible applications, but we're keeping record of them to identify, you know, if there's an area with a lot of demand.
Great. Next question. I hope that answers it. Michael, next question from Fran. Given the vast majority of restaurants are on main streets with speed limits over 25 miles an hour, are they all situated on corners and are using the side street?
That's the case in a number of locations, and a number of locations have been on 25-mile-an-hour streets. The other factor that helps us is if there's a bike lane or sufficient separation from vehicle travel. So we have been able to accommodate some locations that are 30 miles an hour if they are separated by a bike lane. And even in a special case where there was angled parking and a bike lane that created a very large amount of separation between the parking and traffic, we were able to accommodate a 35-mile-an-hour street. But that was a very specific case. Generally, it's 25 miles an hour or less.
And then Fran also asked, is there any ability to get the speed limit lowered on business district streets so that more restaurants can apply for curbside?
I mean, right now, the way speed limits are set is dictated by state law. So unfortunately, the speed limits are based on the 85th percentile of vehicles traveling. So that means that the vehicle traveling at the 85th highest speed dictates the speed limit for that street. So unfortunately, the city doesn't have the power to lower the speed limits at the moment. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Lily.
Yeah, just a couple of things. You know, we have really tried to focus on eliminating as many potentially arbitrary or somewhat flexible you know, legacy requirements for if this were in normal time. But the speed limit issue, and again, you know, I want to commend Rosemary's team, who's been working with applicants to create as much flexibility and fluidity on what to do if you're on a street with a speed limit of more than 25 miles an hour, particularly for street closures themselves. For curbside dining in particular, I just want to take a second because I think that this one is we get this question all the time. When you are traveling as a vehicle, traveling at speeds of 35 and 40 miles an hour, the likelihood that if you hit someone and they die increases tremendously. So as a city, when we are permitting you to operate in the public right of way where there is also vehicle traffic, and the majority of vehicles are traveling at speeds that if they hit someone would die, we have to exercise a lot of caution, right? The whole point of our pandemic response is to keep people alive, and we certainly don't want a situation in which someone dies because of the engineering of a curbside dining space. And I think further, because those spaces are so small, it can happen that you might just, especially if you're on a fast moving street, you might not see that space is closed. So we really care about that 25 mile an hour zone for especially curbside dining spaces, because they're small, they only take up 2 parking spaces, and in fast moving contexts, you might not be able to see it, you crash right in and someone could die. And that just, you know, as the Department of Transportation, we have to do our due diligence to make sure that doesn't happen. Again, when we're closing down part of the street or most of the street, again, Rosemary's team has exercised as much flexibility as possible in those circumstances. And I think that, you know, in some sense, the closure itself helps to bring down speeds, but we haven't actually been able to implement those yet. And so we can't really speak to feasibility and what those end up looking like because we haven't actually closed down a street for full dining. I hope that answers it, and happy to have a sidebar with anybody if it's helpful. I should also just mention on this curbside dining point, if you want more space to dine and a curbside dining permit doesn't give you enough space, you can apply for a full lane closure to get more space. And thank you, Jen, for pointing that out. Really, really helpful. Okay, I hope that answers it again. Another one from Avison Young. If an applicant would like to construct their own dining in the street area to make it more aesthetically pleasing or consistent with existing design cues, is that allowed, or are the bollards, bike racks, and planters the only option? Great question.
So the city can only supply the bike racks, the bollards, either the bollards or something called candlesticks, which serve the same purpose to create more visibility for the area, and the planters. However, the mayor's office has secured some pro bono support from architecture and landscape architecture firms that can help you think about how to design the space and make it more friendly. You know, we're very open to you making the space your own and making it your restaurant. But unfortunately, the traffic control devices are, you know, the city approved options, and those are the only approved options at the moment.
Yeah, and that, just to add on to that, that's a function of what we're able to get our hands on in the middle of a pandemic, and in a matter of a couple months. Okay, last couple questions, and then we'll end it for folks so they can get their afternoons back. But I put up the Al Fresco email for everyone, and we'll also include it in the chat. David asks, how many dining in street have been implemented? I think we answered this one. So
we answered the curbside dining. I think you might be on the street closures. We mentioned earlier, we haven't implemented any of these yet. The city is working on securing materials for them, and they're hoping to implement them in the near future.
And then the last question that I have in the Q&A is, do you have a map of the implemented curbside dining applications?
We do, yeah.
Where can people find it?
Yeah, we can send out a link to applicants. I can share it through the chat now. It's a few days behind, but it's mostly up to date. So let me find the link and I'll share it.
Awesome. Okay, and then I'm gonna do a quick peruse of the chat to make sure that I haven't missed anything as well. And it looks like we have been able, to answer most of them. I do see a question about street vendors, which I do want to lift up. Guadalupe asks, what permits will be required from sidewalk vendors? Rosemary, do you want to take this, and I can also see if Jen can chime in here?
I can go ahead. So the street vendors, to participate in the program, need to be licensed to operate in the city of LA. And typically that means they need approval from the LA County Department of Public Health, as well as the city. But if they are permitted to operate in the city, they're eligible to take part in the LA Al Fresco program.
Great. Okay. So once Rosemary's able to send the link, and thank you, Jen, for giving the URL for more information on street vending. You can find that in the chat. Once Rose is able to share the list of all of the existing sidewalk vending permits, we'll wrap up here. So really appreciate, and here it is on ArcGIS. So really appreciate everyone's time. Thanks for those of you who stuck around in the last 10 minutes. Again, we're here to help. We really appreciate all of the great questions that we got. Hope that this was helpful. This is being recorded. We hope to host it on the coronavirus website, which can also be found in the chat. And wish everybody the most success in getting outdoor dining up and running. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.